Have you ever noticed the same story returning in your life, but with different people, a different face, a different place, a different moment, but the same feeling, the same fear, the same disappointment, the same silence, the same ending? You tell yourself, why does this keep happening to me? Why do I always attract the same kind of situation? Why do I react this way even when I know better? Why do I keep returning to what hurts me? Modern psychology might call this a pattern, an unconscious habit, a wound repeating itself, a familiar emotional map. But ancestral wisdom often understood repetition in a deeper way, not as punishment, not as failure, but as a message. Something unseen is trying to be seen. Something unheard is trying to be heard. Something unfinished is asking for your attention. Hidden Amazon wisdom is inspired by the real work of my mother, a South American writer and anthropologist who studied indigenous cultures and shamanic traditions in situ across South America and Mexico. She did not study these cultures from a distance. She lived close to them. She listened to, she observed. And through that legacy, we ask a simple question. What did ancestral wisdom understand about the human mind that modern life has forgotten? In many shamanic traditions, life was not divided into only psychology, behavior, and thought. There was the visible world, and there was the hidden world, the world of dreams, symbols, ancestors, soul, memory, fear, and unseen forces moving beneath ordinary life. So when the same pain returned again and again, it was not seen as a coincidence, it was seen as a sign. Something in the hidden world was asking to be restored. In Jungian psychology, the unconscious is not silent. It speaks through dreams, through symbols, through reactions, through the people who trigger us, and sometimes through the same pattern repeating again and again. Jung believed that what we do not bring into consciousness does not simply disappear. It shapes us from the dark. It chooses before we know we have chosen. It reacts before we understand why we are reacting. And this is why a person may say, I want something different, but still return to something familiar. Because the unconscious does not always choose what is good for us. Sometimes it chooses what it recognizes. This is one of the hardest truths about emotional patterns. What is familiar can feel safe, even when it hurts. A person who grew up around criticism may feel strangely drawn to people who make them feel not good enough. A person who learned to earn love may keep choosing relationships where they must prove their worth. A person who was ignored may keep chasing unavailable people. A person who was never allowed to speak may keep finding themselves silenced. And from the outside, this can look irrational. But from the inside, the nervous system may recognize it as home. Not because it is healthy, but because it is known. In Jungian language, the pattern often belongs to the shadow, the part of us that carries what we have not fully faced. The rejected grief, the hidden anger, the abandoned child, the longing we pretend not to feel, the fear we cover with control. And because the shadow wants to be known, it often appears outside us, in situations, in relationships, in conflicts, in the same emotional scene, wearing different clothes. Jung called this projection. We meet in the world what we have not yet recognized inside ourselves. This does not mean that everything is your fault. It does not mean you caused every difficult situation. It does not mean you should stay where you are being harmed. But it does mean that your repeated reactions may contain information. They may show you where an old wound is still alive. They may show you what part of yourself still needs protection. They may show you what truth has been waiting underneath the pattern. In shamanic ways of seeing, when something repeats, it may be understood as a sign that balance has not yet returned. Something is out of harmony. Something has been separated. Something has not been heard. The question is not only, how do I stop this? The deeper question is, what is this pattern trying to show me? What part of me keeps returning to this place? What emotion have I not allowed myself to feel? What story about myself am I still obeying? Maybe the pattern says, I am not enough. I must work for love. My needs are too much. If I speak, I will be rejected. If I rest, I will lose everything. These hidden beliefs become invisible laws, and we may live under them for years without ever realizing who gave them to us. A shamanic way of seeing would not ask only, why do you keep choosing this? It might ask, what part of your soul is still trapped inside this story? What old fear keeps calling this experience back? What invisible wound is shaping your visible life? What has been separated from balance? This is where shamanic wisdom and Jungian psychology begin to speak to each other. Jung would call it the unconscious. The shamanic imagination might call it the hidden world. Both point toward the same mystery. There are forces inside us that guide our lives before we understand them. So how do we begin to break a pattern? Not by hating ourselves for repeating it. Not by forcing ourselves to become someone else overnight. but by bringing awareness to the moment before the pattern begins. The pause before you say yes when you mean no. The feeling in your body before you chase someone who is unavailable. The fear that rises before you hide your truth. The anger you swallow before you call yourself calm. The sadness you cover before you tell everyone you are fine. This is where consciousness begins. Not in the dramatic moment, but in the small moment before it. The moment when you see the old path opening and choose not to walk it blindly. In Jungian psychology, this is part of becoming whole. You do not become free by pretending the pattern never existed. You become free by understanding why it was there, what it protected, what it repeated, what it tried to solve, what it was asking you to finally see. And in ancestral wisdom, this is also a kind of return. A return to balance, return to listening, a return to the parts of the soul that were left outside the circle. Because often the pattern is not the enemy. The pattern is the trail. It leads you back to the place where something first became disconnected. Back to the younger self who learned to survive. Back to the voice that was silenced. Back to the grief that was never allowed to move. Back to the truth that waited quietly underneath the performance. And when you see it clearly, something changes. The pattern may still appear. The old feeling may still rise. The familiar road may still call you. But now you are no longer asleep inside it. You can pause. You can breathe. You can ask, is this my truth or my old wound speaking? Is this love or familiarity? Is this choice or repetition? The same pattern does not return because you are broken. It returns because some part of you is asking to be understood differently. And once it is understood, it no longer needs to speak so loudly. In shamanic traditions, the healer is often a tracker, not only of footprints in the forest, but of signs, dreams, symptoms, repetitions, silences, the places where life keeps circling back, because the repeated pattern is like a trail through the inner forest. It leads to the place where something was lost, something frightened, something silenced, something waiting to be brought back into balance. This is why the pattern is not only something to stop, it is something to understand. It is a message from the hidden world of the self. This is the reflection for today from Hidden Amazon Wisdom. A place where South American ancestral wisdom, shamanic imagination, and Jungian psychology meet. Not to give easy answers, but to ask deeper questions. What pattern keeps returning in your life?